My name is Lucas Marin, and at 38, I live alone in a penthouse overlooking downtown Denver. By most definitions, I've made it. A few years ago, I sold a portion of my architectural firm for just over $3,200,000, 0 cents. Enough to leave the rat race and focus only on the projects I actually care about. I have no spouse, no children, and no debts. Just an unshakable sense that peace, real peace, is still out of reach. The money did change what sits under the surface. I still wake up some mornings with a tightness in my chest, as if some invisible weight has climbed into bed with me. And when I see my stepfather's face in my dreams, I understand exactly why. Victor Grayson married my mother when I was 9. On the outside, he was charismatic, successful, polished. Inside our home, behind closed doors, he was something else entirely. Controlling, volatile, emotionally cold, and sometimes violent. He was never my father, only the man who replaced the one I barely remember. My mother, Isabel, is a gentle soul, an art history professor who spent her life trying to keep things from falling apart. She still lives in the old house up in the Boulder foothills, tucked among pine trees and quiet regrets. I don't visit often. We talk. We stay connected. But there's always been a shadow between us. Victor's shadow. Tomorrow is my mother's 65th birthday, and despite every fiber of me wanting to stay far away from Victor, I said yes to dinner. She asked so kindly. Just one evening, Lucas. I told her I'd be there. I'll put on the face, play the good son. But I know the moment I walk into that house, all the years I've tried to move past will be waiting for me inside. The winding drive to the house in Boulder was lined with late spring blooms and a sky that refused to make up its mind, half sunlight, half storm. As I pulled up to the familiar Tudor-style home nestled among the trees, my chest tightened. I hadn't stepped foot on this property in over a year. My mother stood at the door, her silver hair pinned back, her soft eyes lighting up when she saw me. She looked older than the last time I saw her, thinner maybe, but she smiled like nothing had changed. Lucas, she said, wrapping me in a hug that smelled faintly of lavender and lemon tea. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel safe. The celebration was small, just a handful of relatives, some neighbors. Soft jazz drifting from a Bluetooth speaker, and fairy lights hung in the backyard trees like captured stars. My mother moved between guests with grace, offering plates, pouring wine, laughing at the right moments. She was the gravity that kept everything orbiting. And then I saw Victor. He stood near the garden arch, tall as ever, dressed in a charcoal blazer, his posture straight, his presence commanding. The years had etched lines into his face, but his eyes still held that glassy detachment I remembered. When our eyes met, he offered a smile that didn't reach his cheeks. "Lucas," he said, stepping forward, a glass of red wine in each hand. "Join your old man for a drink. This one's special, just for you." The word special landed like a stone in my gut. I took the glass, trying not to show the dread threading through my chest. "Thanks," I managed, my voice flat. I watched him closely as I sipped. Smooth, dry, a little bitter, but nothing overtly wrong. Still, minutes later my head began to swim. The backyard sounds grew distant. Laughter stretched like echoes in a canyon. My legs wobbled. I tried to steady myself but failed. The glass slipped from my hand and shattered against the grass as I collapsed. I woke up in the upstairs bedroom, my mother's hand gripping mine. Her eyes were swollen, scared. "You only had one glass, didn't you?" she whispered. I nodded, heart pounding, mind racing. Something was wrong, very wrong. Lying in that old upstairs bedroom, surrounded by fading posters and books from a life I left behind, memories came back like splinters. I was 9 the first time Victor hit me. Just a backhand across the face for dropping a glass of orange juice. No warning, no anger beforehand, just cold discipline disguised as parenting. It never stopped. He never bruised me where people could see, never raised his voice in public. My mother, sweet, gentle Isabel, did what she could. Sometimes she'd step in. Most of the time, she just looked away, as if believing silence could shield us both. But those days never really left me. I'd built my life to get as far from them as possible. But now, lying there with a pounding headache and my mother watching me like I might vanish, the past didn't feel so distant. I remembered how my grandfather, Samuel Navarro, Isabel's father, died when I was 12. It was so... He collapsed during a family dinner after a glass of wine, his face turning pale before he hit the ground. They said it was a heart attack. No history of illness, no warning signs. I'd never questioned it before. But now, Victor had been managing Samuel's estate at the time. I remembered overhearing things. Arguments between him and my mother. Whispers about money. Documents, signed quickly. After Samuel's death, Victor somehow came into control of several valuable properties meant for Isabel. At the time, I thought it was complicated adult stuff. Now it looked like motive. And it echoed down to the wine. The sudden collapse. The helplessness. I didn't say much to my mother as she fussed over me that night. But I knew something had shifted. This wasn't just about a strained father-son relationship. There was a pattern here. Something calculated. Something dangerous. And for the first time in decades, I started to wonder if Victor had killed before. If what happened to me at the party wasn't a mistake, but a failed repeat of something he thought he'd gotten away with. I didn't have proof. Not yet. But I was done ignoring the questions. Thanksgiving came faster than I expected, and with it another invitation from my mother. Her voice was warm, but I could hear the edge of worry. "Just a quiet dinner," she said. "Victor's been keeping to himself." I should have said no. Everything in me screamed to stay away, but a part of me needed to go back. Not for Victor, but for her. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. If there was something to uncover, I had to be there to see it happen. The estate was quiet when I arrived, the sky already dark, stars sharp and cold above the pines. Inside, the table was set with care. Candles, heirloom china, a roast turkey steaming in the center. My mother buzzed around the kitchen, keeping things cheerful. Victor sat at the head of the table, a familiar position that made my skin crawl. He looked at me as I entered and raised a glass. "Lucas," he said, grinning, "glad you could make it. I poured you something special." That word again. Special. It landed like a trigger, snapping my nerves into alert. He handed me a glass of red wine, rich and dark, the same brand I remembered from my mother's birthday. I smiled thinly, nodded, and sat across from him. Dinner began. Conversation drifted. I barely heard any of it. My mind was focused on one thing, the glass in my hand. I waited until my mother got up to grab dessert. Then, quickly and silently, I dropped my napkin. As I bent to pick it up, I switched glasses with Victor, a subtle sleight of hand I'd practiced all week. No one noticed. He lifted the glass with a smirk and drank deeply. I barely sipped. My fingers trembled, but I kept my face still. 10 minutes passed. 20. Nothing happened. I started to question myself, wonder if I was unraveling after all. But then... Victor paused mid-sentence. His fork clattered against his plate. He rubbed his temple, swaying slightly. I don't feel right," he muttered. My mother rushed over. "Victor?" He staggered to his feet, gripping the edge of the table, then collapsed, knocking over his wine glass. The dark liquid splattered across the tablecloth like spilled blood. Panic erupted. My mother screamed. I called 911. The paramedics arrived and rushed Victor to the hospital. As the chaos unfolded, I stayed calm, but inside, my blood ran cold. I hadn't imagined it. Whatever had been in that wine had been real, and this time, he drank it himself. I waited until everyone had left and quietly collected the shattered glass and the dregs still clinging to the inside. I poured what was left into a small plastic vial and slipped it into my coat pocket. I didn't know what I was going to find, but I knew this was the beginning of the truth. The vial of wine sat on my kitchen counter like a live grenade. I stared at it for hours the next morning, knowing it could hold the answer to everything and dreading what that answer might be. I didn't trust the local police, not with something like this. If I went to them now without proof, they'd write me off as paranoid or spiteful. No, this had to be airtight. Through a friend in the design industry, I found a contact, Indigo Labs, a discreet, privately operated facility in San Francisco that specialized in chemical and toxicology analysis. I called, explained I needed fast, confidential results. The woman on the other end didn't ask questions. Bring it in. 3-day turnaround. That was all I needed. I booked a flight that same afternoon. The vial tucked in a foam-padded case inside my backpack felt heavier than its weight. I didn't tell anyone. Not my mother, not friends, not my assistant. This wasn't about exposing Victor yet. It was about proving to myself that I wasn't losing it, that I hadn't misread everything, that something sinister really had been inside that glass. When I handed the sample over at the lab, the technician, a woman named Dr. Eliza Mendez, took it with careful hands, labeled it, and gave me a slip with a barcode. "You'll hear from us in 72 hours, she said. Her tone was professional, but her eyes lingered on me a second longer than necessary. Maybe she could feel it too, that this wasn't just about chemicals or compounds. This was about survival. The next few days were excruciating. I couldn't sleep. I wandered my apartment at night, picturing Victor's face as he collapsed, remembering the way he emphasized special when he handed me the glass. It wasn't a coincidence. He hadn't picked that word by accident. He had tried to poison me, twice. And if he had, then maybe, just maybe, he had done it before, to someone else. The pieces were aligning, but I still needed the missing one, the hard science. If the tests came back clean, it all fell apart. But if it didn't, if there was something there, then this wasn't just personal anymore. It was criminal. The call came late on the third evening. Dr. Mendez's voice was calm, but there was a weight behind it. "Mr. Marin, we completed the analysis. The wine sample contained a high concentration of phenobarbital, a powerful barbiturate. The dose could cause unconsciousness, even death if untreated." I didn't speak for several seconds. I just stared out the window at the Denver skyline, heart pounding. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in the dark, letting it hit me. This wasn't paranoia. This was premeditated. Victor had tried to kill me, and if I hadn't switched glasses on Thanksgiving, he would have succeeded. I drove to Boulder the next morning. My mother greeted me in her robe, tired eyes blinking behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Lucas?" she said, surprised to see me unannounced. "Is everything okay?" I didn't waste time. I sat her down at the kitchen table and slid the lab report across the surface. "He drugged me," I said quietly. "There's no doubt anymore." She read it slowly, hand trembling as she traced each line. When she finished, she didn't cry. She just stared ahead, hollow and stunned. "I knew something wasn't right," she whispered. "On your birthday, when you collapsed, I felt it in my gut. And now," she looked up at me, "Lucas, I have to tell you something about my father." She took a deep breath, as if preparing to walk through fire. "The night he died, Samuel, he had dinner with Victor, just the two of them. I was at a conference in Santa Fe. Victor said they had a few drinks, and when he came back into the room, my father had collapsed. Everyone said it was a heart attack, but he was healthy. No family history, no signs. I've never been able to shake the feeling that something else happened. I felt the floor shift beneath me. My grandfather's death had always been a quiet, sad footnote in our family's story. Now it pulsed with new meaning. "You think Victor killed him?" I said. She nodded slowly. "He inherited almost everything. My father's properties, his savings. He took care of the paperwork before I even got home. I wanted to believe it was just efficiency. But now," she looked at me, her face pale with dawning horror, "now I think I've been living with a murderer." With my mother now fully on my side, we moved quickly. We contacted Dev Patel, a meticulous private investigator I'd worked with once on a legal dispute involving a fraudulent contractor. When we laid out what we knew, The wine, the lab results, the suspicious inheritance. He didn't hesitate. If your stepfather's done this before, there'll be a paper trail. Men like him always leave something behind, he said. It was in a week. Dev uncovered irregularities in the transfer of Samuel Navarro's estate. Documents signed days after his death bore signatures that didn't match official records. Some were allegedly signed while my mother was still out of town. Worse, several properties that were supposed to be placed in a family trust had somehow ended up in Victor's private holdings just months later. Dev called it what it was: fraud. We took this evidence to Nina Reyes, a criminal attorney with a reputation for tearing apart financial crime cases. She reviewed everything and said, "This is more than just suspicious. It's actionable." With her help, we filed for a court order to exhume my grandfather's body, requesting a full toxicology screening. It felt brutal, invasive, even disrespectful. But it was the only way to prove what Victor had done all those years ago. My mother signed the paperwork with shaking hands but firm resolve. If he did this to my father, I want the truth. I can't live with this silence anymore, she said. The test results came back 2 weeks later and they hit like a hammer. Traces of a barbiturate compound, nearly identical to the one found in my Thanksgiving wine, still present in my grandfather's preserved tissue. He hadn't died of a heart attack. He'd been poisoned. Quietly, efficiently, just like Victor had tried to do to me. At this point, we weren't chasing shadows anymore. We had lab reports, forged signatures, financial records, and motive. We had a man who had murdered for inheritance once, and tried again. My mother sat across from me, a stack of documents in front of her, and said something I'll never forget. "He's not just a monster, Lucas. He's a pattern, and patterns have to be broken." We knew what had to come next. We were going to bring Victor down. We didn't wait for the police to come knocking. We went to Victor ourselves, or rather I did. I wanted to look him in the eye when the truth hit. My mother stayed in the car outside the estate, unable to face him directly but unwilling to be far. Victor was back from the hospital by then, thinner and paler, walking with a cane, but his arrogance hadn't faded. He opened the door with that same smug grin. "Lucas," he said, "come to check on the old man?" I stepped past him without a word and placed a manila folder on the coffee table. Inside was everything: the lab report from the wine, the forged estate documents, the toxicology report for my grandfather's remains. For a moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, his face dropped. The smirk vanished. His hand trembled. "What is this?" he asked, voice tight. I kept my voice even. "This is proof. You tried to kill me, and you killed Samuel. You're done." He laughed once, a dry, hollow sound, but it collapsed into a cough. "You can't prove intent," he muttered. "This won't stick." I leaned in. I switched the glasses on Thanksgiving. "You drank the poison meant for me. That alone will stick. And my mother heard your confession. If you don't come clean, we'll go to the press, to the DA, to anyone who'll listen." His eyes flashed with something I'd never seen in him before: fear. We filed charges the next morning. Nina led the case, and Dev served as a key witness, breaking down the paper trail in meticulous detail. The trial was swift but brutal. My mother took the stand, recounting her father's suspicious death, Victor's behavior, and the night I collapsed. She didn't cry. She was calm, clear, and devastating. I watched her with quiet pride. Victor tried to deny everything, but the evidence crushed him. The jury deliberated less than 2 hours. Guilty. Attempted murder and first-degree murder. Life without parole. As the bailiffs cuffed him and led him from the courtroom, he turned once toward my mother and me. His expression wasn't rage. It was defeat. A man who thought he was smarter than everyone, finally cornered by the people he thought he'd broken. I didn't feel triumph, just relief. The truth was out, and it was over. After the trial, my mother sold the house in Boulder and moved into a quiet apartment near City Park in Denver. We didn't talk much about Victor anymore, not because we forgot, but because we didn't need to. Some wounds don't close, they just stop bleeding. She took up gardening on her balcony, filling it with lavender and succulents, and started teaching a local art appreciation class. I visited often. We drank tea in the afternoons, watched the sunset turn the skyline gold, and talked about everything but the past. For the first time in decades, my mother laughed freely, and I found myself breathing easier. The weight that had followed me since childhood had finally lifted. One evening, as we stood together overlooking the city, she turned to me and said, "He doesn't get to own our story anymore." And she was right. The past was behind us. What remained was ours to rebuild. Together. Isn't just a story about family betrayal. It's a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous threats come from the people closest to us. Lucas Marin's journey shows us that silence doesn't protect, it enables. He could have ignored the warning signs, buried the pain of his past, and looked the other way. But he chose to seek the truth, even when it meant facing the darkest corners of his family's legacy. The real lesson? Trust your instincts, question what doesn't feel right, and never let fear silence you. Justice isn't always about the courtroom. It's about reclaiming your voice, your peace, and your future. Lucas and his mother did just that. Not just for themselves, but for the memory of a loved one stolen too soon. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Like this post, subscribe for more gripping, thought-provoking stories, and share it with someone who needs a reminder. The truth always finds a way out, especially when you're brave enough to face it.